The next topic is George Floyd. Now, keep in mind, remember how there was some disagreement over his primary cause of death. No one here is saying that there wasn't some kind of police misconduct. No one here is saying that it didn't necessarily also act as a confounding factor to the death, but there absolutely was some disagreement over the primary cause of death. So, the Wikipedia article dismisses the other more likely primary causes of death if you watch the court case. For example, advanced heart disease, fentanyl, COVID-19, which will take us to the COVID-19 page in a little bit, again, in the spirit of consistency. So Wikipedia wrote the medical examiner found Floyd's heart stopped due to, quote, law enforcement subdual, restraint, and neck compression, though fentanyl intoxication and recent methamphetamine use may have increased the likelihood of death. Now, to give you some context, on the other side of the coin here, the prosecution, right, they tried to debunk the idea that drugs played a significant role or even a primary role in George Floyd's death, claiming that Floyd's body, I don't know if you remember this, had processed a lot of fentanyl, so it couldn't have been an overdose because he had taken it likely over a long period of time. Okay. So, our change to the article on Wikipedia revealed a huge hole in their argument. Let me read it to you. The prosecution's point fails to consider that a person who dies of overdose may have also consumed and processed the substance on more than one occasion, i.e. prior to the potentially fatal dose, and relies on the presupposition that there was only one administration of fentanyl. Now, there's nothing that can be argued about that, empirically, medically. And if you've watched the trial, you know that these arguments were made on both sides. So again, we're talking about neutrality.
Yes.
Wherever you line up, you need to include these points of view, and you certainly need to include arguments made on the legal record and with medical substantiation. Wikipedia took it down. What did they say? Quote, there is strong consensus against this content. Now, here's what's so scary about that. Strong consensus. Okay, who determines consensus? Let's discuss on any issue. By the way, that's still truth 0.
Wikipedia 4.
So Wikipedia has 4 Wikipedias.
Well, also just that response, though, is so blanket and not an answer or reason.
And this is what they do, right? They say strong consensus against this content. Well, okay, first off, there are certain areas where consensus matters. For example, theology, philosophy. Consensus might be on the results of a scientific experiment, right? The interpretation of the results. However, consensus doesn't determine science. It could be the consensus that the Earth is flat somewhere in the world at some point in time. The truth is that it's not, right? There could be some kind of scientific consensus, for example, that Florida would have been gone in 2013, or all of the predictions that we've gone through from an inconvenient truth. The science, the truth, shows that it's not. Here it says there's strong consensus against this content. Well, who determines consensus? Who determines consensus on Wikipedia? The same people who determine consensus on Facebook, Google, Twitter. And by the way, these people who determine consensus, these are the same people who determine the fact checkers that are used in legacy media. So what's scary is when you have a very small group of people who are forming a consensus, and then they are saying no opposing point of view from outside of our consensus is allowed because we've already achieved consensus. This is the most terrifying response you can get because that's a response that can be used for anything, and it's a response that Wikipedia, or in another case, Facebook, YouTube, Google, Alphabet, could use for any issue.
Well, just to gain control and to get your agenda out.
Yeah.
It really has nothing to do with... That's absurd.
Well, consensus says you're absurd.
Well,
here's
my consensus says I'm not.
I don't have any. What do we do?
I have consensus
consensus
parties
versus
every
consensus.
Thursday. They're very consensual.
Well, I don't need your consensus.
Watch Louder with Crowder live, Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern.